It's interesting to me how Whitman and Dickinson keep coming back. We can't escape them. I guess as an American poet abroad, I just want to specifically address my experience, which has been going to China, Hong Kong, Taiwan for various festivals. And often as part of these festivals, there are what are called poet-to-poet translations. So in China, one of the sort of agendas at work is, for instance, I'll pick a poem that I wrote in English, and then there'll be a Chinese poet who will translate it, but I will be available if he has questions, and the organizers will have teams of translators available. And then the Chinese poet will pick a poem that he would like to have translated into English, and I'll take that poem in Chinese and work with it. But as I have difficulty, I'll work or ask the translator questions. But the key is that the poet himself or herself is also there and available, so that there's this kind of cross-cultural exchange. I guess I want to say that when I made my first trip to China in 1985, after the Cultural Revolution and things had opened up, I met Gu Chung, one of the Misty School poets, and it interested me that he said, you know, all the schools and universities were closed for 10 years. Beidao, Yanglian, my friends, we didn't know classical Chinese poetry. You have to understand that the gap between modern Chinese and classical Chinese is as great as the difference between English and Chinese. I mean, the vocabulary is drastically different. The syntax, it's like two completely different languages. And for those younger poets, they said they turned to America. They turned to reading translations of Whitman and Dickinson. They turned to Ezra Pound's Cafe, and it was there that they saw a reflection of themselves and an image of classical Chinese poetry. And so it's fascinating to me that Whitman and Dickinson were, in a way, the vehicle that the young Chinese poets seized on as forces which they could then liberate their own voices with, because they didn't have that in their own tradition or had been taken away because of the politics of the time. And even as recently as 5 years ago, Xi Chuan, one of the leading Chinese poets in Beijing, told me, well, Xi Chuan, that's my pen name, that means Western River. All of my inspiration has come out of Western poetry, American poetry, and now I've been teaching American poetry for 15 years. It's now time for me to start learning classical Chinese and so start at the beginning. So there's this whole movement for poets in China trying to reclaim the past, but there's this huge gulf or abyss. And one of the crucial sort of bridges for them is actually American poetry, to be looking at Whitman and Dickinson. So I find that endlessly fascinating as an American poet traveling abroad to sort of what has this reflection, or you can say Walt's shadow is great. It follows you wherever you go. But I did want to read a translation that I did of a poem by Xi Chuan. And in a way, I read it as an example of a poem that sort of is in limbo, because to what extent is it Chinese? To what extent is it, in a way, Western or American? I think it's endlessly fascinating, and one of the consequences of American poets traveling abroad, it seems to me, is a kind of internationalism. And English itself is always in transition, as all languages are, but I find it endlessly fascinating to think about where sort of language or poetry is going and how different countries are influencing each other. So this is a poem by Xi Chuan that I translated into English. He was available, and my Chinese is poor, and as I got stuck, I had the opportunity to ask him, well, what's going on with this phrase or that phrase? It's a prose poem, so that's not a form that exists. Really, I mean, we can get into that with rhyme prose, but basically it's a form that is imported. And it's called After Wang Ximeng's Blue and Green Horizontal Landscape Scroll. So again, I find this as an interesting sort of bridge between contemporary American poetry and contemporary China. Green colors and blue colors flow together and form empty mountains. Some people are walking in them, but they're still empty mountains, as if the people walking there have no faces, but they are still people. No one should try to recognize themselves in these figures or try to see the real mountains and waters of this world. Nor should anyone try of thinking to gain casual praise from Wang Ximeng. Wang Ximeng knows these small figures and that not one is he himself. These are not his figures, and he cannot call out a single one by name. The figures acquire the mountains and waters, just as the mountains acquire the emerald and lapis, just as the waters acquire vastness and boats. Just as Emperor Huizong got Wang Ximeng at 18 years old, not knowing that Wang would die soon after he finished this 1,000 miles of rivers and mountains. The mountains and waters are nameless. Wang Ximeng realizes that people without names are just decorations in mountains and waters. Just as flying birds know they are insignificant to men's games, and the birds meet in the sky. Meanwhile, people walking in the mountains have their own directions to travel and their own plans. These small figures in white walk, sit at leisure, go fishing, trade, surrounded by green colors and blue colors. Just like today, people in black go to banquets, concerts, and funerals, surrounded by golden colors and more golden colors. These small figures in white have never been born and so have never died. Just like Wang Ximeng's landscape utopia, they are immune to pollution and invasion, and that is worth careful consideration. So people who are far away from social controls have no need to long for freedom. And people who haven't been destroyed by experience aren't concerned about forgetting. Wang Ximeng let the fishermen have infinite numbers of fishes to go fishing. He allowed limitless waters to run out from the mountains. According to him, happiness means the exact amount of blessing, so that immersed in the silence between mountains and waters, people can build bridges, water wheels, roads, houses, and live quietly, just like the trees growing appropriately in the mountains, along the margins of water, or surrounding a village and surrounding people. In the distance, the trees are like flowers. When they sway, it's the time when the clear wind is rising. When the clear wind is rising, it's time for people to sing. When people sing, it's time for an empty mountain to become an empty mountain. So to what extent is this poem Chinese or English? Or one of the things I find endlessly fascinating, of course, is as an American poet traveling abroad, I'm constantly looking at, thinking about how can I absorb, learn from the Chinese tradition, but use it in a contemporary way. And that's endlessly fascinating. And translation is a vehicle that enriches one's own language, but it's also this cultural exchange and this bridge. I'll stop here.
So